In 1847, a doctor in Vienna noticed something that should have made him famous. Instead, it destroyed him. Let me tell you what he found. Semmelweis worked at Vienna General Hospital, running a maternity clinic where new mothers were dying at a horrifying rate. Over 13% of his patients died from a disease called childbed fever. But here's what really disturbed him. Just down the hall, a second maternity clinic, run by midwives instead of doctors, had a death rate of only 2%. Same hospital, same disease, 6 times the difference. For months, Semmelweis couldn't explain it. Then, in 1847, his close friend and colleague died after a small cut during an autopsy. His symptoms looked exactly like the women dying of childbed fever. And that's when it clicked. Doctors and medical students were performing autopsies, then walking straight into the maternity ward without washing their hands. Midwives never touched a cadaver. Semmelweis had a theory that sounded almost too simple. Doctors were carrying something invisible from the dead to the living. He ordered every doctor and student to wash their hands in a chlorinated lime solution before touching a single patient. Here's what happened next. The mortality rate dropped from 18% to 1%. Almost overnight, hand washing was saving lives no one else could save. You'd think that would be the end of the story. A hero, a discovery, a celebration. It wasn't even close, because Semmelweis couldn't explain why it worked. Germs hadn't been discovered yet, and in medicine, in 1847, being right without an explanation the establishment accepted wasn't good enough. Part 2. Semmelweis had proof. Real numbers. Lives actually saved. You'd think that would be enough. It wasn't. Here's what happened when he tried to tell people. The medical establishment rejected him almost entirely. Without germ theory to explain why hand washing worked, older doctors saw his idea as an insult that implied their own unwashed hands had been killing patients for years. Nobody wants to hear that they've been the cause of death disguised as care. So instead of adopting his method, most of Vienna's medical community mocked him. He lost his position at the hospital, moved to Budapest, kept trying, kept being ignored. Here's the part that should genuinely disturb you. Semmelweis wasn't just dismissed. He was humiliated, repeatedly, publicly, by men who outranked him and refused to test his simple, life-saving idea. By 1861, years of being right and unheard had started breaking something in him. He grew increasingly agitated, erratic. Some historians believe depression, others suspect a form of dementia. Either way, the man who saved thousands of lives was slowly unraveling in front of everyone who'd refused to listen to him. In 1865, his own colleagues tricked him. They told him they were taking him somewhere for treatment. He realized too late where he was actually being taken. Part 3. When Semmelweis realized where his colleagues were actually taking him, he tried to leave. He fought back. He was beaten severely by the asylum guards and locked away. Here's what almost nobody knows about his final days. During the struggle, he sustained a wound on his right hand. The same hand he'd spent nearly 2 decades insisting doctors needed to wash before touching another human life. That wound became infected. 14 days after being admitted, Ignaz Semmelweis was dead. He was 47. Here's the detail that still doesn't feel real. His autopsy revealed the cause of death: sepsis. The exact disease process, the exact kind of infection that he had spent his entire career trying to prevent in new mothers. He died from the very thing he'd given his life trying to stop. Not metaphorically, literally, medically, the same mechanism. Here's what happened after he was already gone. Just a few years later, Louis Pasteur's germ theory was accepted by the scientific world. Everything Semmelweis had argued suddenly made perfect sense to the very people who had mocked him. He didn't live to hear a single apology. Part 4. Ignaz Semmelweis didn't die from a wound. He died from being right at the wrong time, in front of people who needed him to be wrong. Here's what that actually means. His idea wasn't rejected because it was bad science. The numbers were undeniable. 18% mortality dropped to 1%. Nobody could argue with the results. It was rejected because accepting it meant accepting blame. Doctors would have had to admit that their own hands they trusted, hands they never questioned, had been killing patients for years. Psychologists have a name for this kind of resistance: cognitive dissonance. When new information conflicts so badly with what you already believe about yourself that rejecting the information feels easier than rejecting your own self-image. It wasn't that his colleagues couldn't understand him. It's that understanding him meant seeing themselves as the danger. Here's why this still matters 150 years later. Being right has never been enough on its own. People don't just need evidence, they need permission to admit they were wrong. And that permission is rarely given easily. Semmelweis gave the world proof. What he never got in his lifetime was anyone willing to actually hear it. If you've ever been dismissed for being right too early or too inconvenient, his story isn't really about history. It's about how little that pattern has changed.